Ever wondered why Sodom and Gomorrah were really judged? Completely erased from earth, from fire, from heaven? Because again, most people associate this famous event with sexual immorality and pride. But the truth is much more disturbing. In the Bible history, it talks about sexual perversion, but when you dig deeper into more books of the Bible, especially in the book of Judicial, you will see that it symbolizes absolute moral decay, corruption, perversion, and you will see that divine judgment was needed. Because most people are just familiar with the Genesis account of their destruction. Few people realize just how deep the wickedness ran in these cities. Bibles prior to the 1600 canon reform that led to the church reducing the content, such as like books of Jasher, Enoch, and other books, are unaware of this chilling picture of a society given over to extreme evil beyond sexual immorality, but of oppression and violence and wickedness. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not just merely a punishment. It was a necessary act of divine intervention to stop the spread of this total lawlessness. You'll see in this teaching that we examine in depth that these cities were just in complete depravity. Why God's judgment fell upon them so severely, and how their story is a stark warning to our modern world, which you will see a lot of mirror reflection. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah recorded in Genesis 18:19, according to the Bible, it says their sins were so grievous that God himself came down to investigate. Quote, "And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, because their sin is so grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done all together according of what they cry, which is come upon me, and if not, I will know." Genesis 18:20. God's judgment was not immediate. He first allowed Abraham to intercede, showing mercy and patience. But despite Abraham's pleas, there was not even 10 righteous people in the entire city to save it from destruction. He started at 50 righteous people, and they went back and forth, saying, if you even find 10, will you spare it? He said, yeah. Imagine an area of cities that was so depraved that there wasn't even 10 righteous people. I'm going to shed some light on the horrific accounts of Sodom. The Sodomites were known for inventing twisted laws to protect their corruption. I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of things and then go into further detail. When strangers came, they were forbidden from receiving food and water. Anyone caught giving strangers food or water were tortured and killed. Visitors that came into the town, they would publicly torture them for entertainment. In Sodom and Gomorrah, they literally had beds in the streets where they would tie up the strangers, starve them to death, torture them to death. Sodom, they would gang rape them for entertainment. In this town, merchants tricked the starving people by placing coins on their rooftops. And when the poor attempted to take the money, the citizens would literally laugh and refuse to give them food after they got the money. So they would trick the folks that ended up in their town by helping them get money. They would play games with them, but they would sell them no food. They would literally starve them to death for entertainment. And it's beyond even that. The courts, they always ruled in favor of the citizens, which were all criminals. They never gave the outsiders, the victims, any leeway. If a man was attacked or robbed, the judges always sided with the wicked. You know, sodomite women there engaged in really unnatural acts. They married animals, performed sexual rituals with these animals. In this town, they experimented with genetic corruption and experiments, similar to what we saw with the fallen angels. These towns were institutionalized to be inhospitable. They were made for cruelty, and the judges of the cities were at the center of this wickedness. You know, the judges played a pivotal role in institutionalizing and perpetrating the profound wickedness of these cities. Their actions not only endorsed it, but they mandated the behaviors that were just completely unethical, completely depraved, unmoral. You know, there was judges in each town. In Sodom, there was Judge Sirach. In Gomorrah, there was Judge Sharked. And in the city of Admah, there was Judge Sepnak. In the city of Semboya, there was Judge Menon. These judges were instrumental in crafting and enforcing laws that promoted cruelty and injustice beyond what most people can comprehend. For example, they decreed that beds had to be placed in the streets for malicious purposes. And I quote, "By the desire of the four judges, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah had beds erected in the streets of the cities. And if a man came to these places, they laid a hold of him, brought him to one of the beds, and by force made him lie, and they laid in them." I'm sure you guys know what they laid in them. If the individuals were shorter than the beds, they would forcibly stretch them. If taller, they would sever their legs. These perverse practices was a direct result of the judges' edicts in these towns. So, you know, the judges' corruption extended to their very names, which were indicative of their nature. So that first judge, the Judge Shakrer, it means liar. Judge Shakatkura means awful liar. Judge Zephagaya means forger, an extreme liar. And then the last judge, his name means perverter of justice. The rulings consisted always favoring the wicked. For example, if a person was assaulted by a neighbor's wife and accused her to miscarry, the judge would order the husband to give his wife to the assailant so she could become pregnant again. Such judgments blatantly mocked justice and protected the guilty. This is just how they rolled there. I mean, this is one of those places you wouldn't want to be caught after dark. The inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah were notorious for deliberate mistreatment of strangers and the needy. As I've mentioned once already, they enacted laws prohibiting offering assistance to outsiders, ensuring that the visitors would suffer. An example of this involves a man that had wandered into the town. He was poor. He didn't have much. He entered into Sodom seeking sustenance. He was hungry. He was starving. The decree in that town was no one provide him food, water, or even shelter, intending him to perish, to die from starvation. One lady in this town, her name was Paleth. She was a compassionate daughter of Lot's. So she was a daughter of Lot, Abraham's Lot. She saw this, and she felt bad. She secretly provided him with bread every time she went to the water well to get water for the pitcher, she would, on the way from the house, would put a morsel of bread in her bucket. And she would drop it off to him every time she went to get water. So the townspeople, they got suspicious. They're like, why is this guy not dying? He's been sitting there without food and water for so long. He should have for surely perished by now. So the townsmen, they started hiding and watching what was going on, watching the man, and they discovered her act of kindness. They took her before the judge, and the judge condemned her for death. They burned her alive in the town square for everyone to watch. Lot's daughter, showcasing their merciless nature. I mean, geez. Another story, there was a man named Eliezer. He was a servant of Abraham. During one of his visits to Sodom, he witnessed a local man assaulting and robbing a stranger, leaving the victim literally laid out on the ground, destitute. He was moved by compassion because of his bloodline, so he confronted the aggressor, questioning his actions. The sodomite retorted, questioning his authority, saying, "Who are you to judge?" And then the sodomite struck the man, the Eliezer, on the forehead with a stone, causing him to bleed everywhere. And the sodomite, observing the blood, cynically demanded payment from the guy, claiming he had provided him a service by relieving him of bad blood, asserting that the assault on his forehead was a customary law in Sodom. So when Eliezer refused to pay, the assailant, the sodomite, took him before the judge. Took him before Judge Sirach. Remember, Sirach means liar. One of Sodom's judges. They went before the judge, went back and forth, and the judge upheld the sodomite's claim, ordering Eliezer to compensate his attacker, recognizing the perverse nature of Sodom's justice system. He refused to pay the guy. He's like, I'm not paying the guy. He struck me with a rock in the forehead. And now you guys are trying to scam me, saying that, he relieved me of bad blood by, hitting me in the head with a rock and making me bleed. I guess, luckily for that guy, he had the blood of Abraham, and he wasn't going to take it. So Eliezer responded by striking the judge in the head with a stone, causing him to bleed. And then he demanded payment from the judge, mirroring the earlier demand made to him by the other sodomite. The judge, unable to refute Eliezer's logic without contradicting his own ruling, ordered Eliezer's assailant to pay both him and the injured stranger, highlighting the absurdity and the corruption of the Saddam's legal system. This next story involves a traveler from the city of Elam. He came into the town and bumped into a man named Hadid. The man from Elam, he was just passing through. He had his donkey adorned with really fine stuff. He had a multicolored mantle secured by a cord. Remember, during those time periods, if you had, fine linen, really nice rope that had purple and different colors in it, this was a sign of extreme, it was a class status symbol. So as the evening approached, he sought lodging. And in the city, he found no hospitality, just because that was customary in Sodom. So the guy Hadad, the sodomite that lived there, known for his wickedness, approached the traveler, inquiring about his journey, offering him shelter. Grateful, the traveler accepted and stayed at Hadad's house. Before settling in, Hadad took the traveler's mantle and his cord, saying that he was keeping it for safekeeping. The following morning, the traveler got up early, prepared to depart, and requested for his belongings to be returned. However, Hadad claimed that the traveler had experienced a dream. Actually, let me back up a little bit. Hadad said, hey, have breakfast with me, blah, blah, blah. And they talked and conversated, and the talking and conversation went on for so long that by the time they were done talking, the traveler wanted to leave, and Hadad was like, it's not safe to leave. It's too late in the day. Get up tomorrow early, and you can be on your way. And I believe this went on for 2 or 3 days. Every day, the guy would get up, attempt to leave. The sodomite Hadad would say, hey, don't leave without having fellowship with me. Hang out with me, eat, drink, be merry. And they would talk and talk. And then when the traveler was ready to leave, Hadad was like, it's too late in the day. It's not safe to leave. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 days, but this went on for a few days. However, finally, the traveler was like, all right, I'm not down with this anymore. Hadad was like, he tells them that he had a dream, that he was merely dreaming that he had the cord. He was merely dreaming that he had a multicolored mantle. Because remember, when the traveler got there, Hadad took his mantle and his multicolored cord and put it up for safekeeping. Now he's telling the traveler that he had dreamt all this. Saying, no, you never arrived with that. You dreamt it. And I'm going to interpret your dream for you, because that's clearly what you had, was a dream. That you had this cord. This cord that symbolized the extension of the traveler's life. And the multicolored mantle represented a future vineyard where the traveler would plant various fruit trees. That was the translation of the dream from Hadad. And then Hadad insisted that his dream interpretation warranted a fee of 3 pieces of silver, asserting that this was customary to charge for dream interpretation. The traveler protested, emphasizing that he had entrusted his items to Hadad, and that he did not experience the dream, that he came there with those items. Hadad, he wasn't flexing, and demanded both payment for the alleged interpretation of the dream, and now he wanted compensation for the meals and the traveler's stay. So, seeking justice, the traveler brought the matter before Judge Sirach, the judge of Sodom. We already know what he's about, notorious for his corruption. And after they went back and forth in front of the judge sided with Hadad, affirming that the dream was fabricated, that the dream of him, having those items was just a dream. That he didn't show up with those items because this man had a track record of interpreting dreams that were very accurate. And matter of fact, this guy had a track record of interpreting dreams, and it is his line of work, so you need to pay the man for telling you about your dream, and told the traveler that he was obligated to pay. The traveler, overwhelmed by the blatant injustice, he was really upset. Ultimately, after they screamed and yelled, went back at each other in front of the courts, both men were expelled from the court, and the people of Sodom, displaying their inherent cruelty, drove the traveler out of the city, and he left without his possessions. I mean, guys, I think you guys are starting to see the bigger picture here. So the societal norms of these cities were steeped in just debauchery. They would have communal gatherings where men would seize each other's wives and daughters, engaging in rampant promiscuity without any sense of guilt or shame. This was a normal affair in these cities where the moral boundaries had been completely erased. Individuals who openly indulged in this type of behavior. In these towns, the judicial system, as you've seen, were just deeply corrupted. Anyone that wandered into these towns were just taken advantage of. You know, we saw that with the Traveler. There was many, many accounts of this where people would be assaulted and robbed and taken before the courts, and the courts would require them to pay the assaulter. You know, the citizens had a very perverse pleasure from the suffering of the less fortunate. They literally would provide beggars with coins marked with unique symbols, but simultaneously issue a decree forbidding anyone to give them food or any services, even if they had money. And on a regular basis, beggars would just literally starve to death in the town. And those who ever helped them, they would be tortured to death. And they received just morbid satisfaction from the misery of others. The legal framework within these cities was designed to uphold and to make legit the acts of these wicked judges. It was just wickedness at its core. You know, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were often cited as the trademark standard of moral decay, with their transgressions commonly associated with everything from sexual immorality to torture, idolatry, worshiping Baal and Moloch. It was out of hands. The inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah, they were like the Canaanites, engaged in worship of these deities. This idolatry was just not a matter of religious intention, but it was a part of their practices. It was a part of their moral framework. They worshiped Baal, who was their prominent deity. And, they worship of Baal in their mind gave them fertility and agriculture. And it encompassed all sorts of unmoral rituals. The Canaanites in those regions would literally have sexual rituals with the strangers, end up torturing them, burning them to death, a part of these rituals. And the most egregious practice of these cities is they would literally sacrifice their little ones to the worship of Moloch. It was just a normal affair to keep the population balanced and to provide Moloch what he needed to be happy. They literally would pass their children through the fire. So these horrific rituals was just part of the norm there, where sons and daughters, if they wanted to receive favor by the judges, by Moloch, usually every family, 50% of their offspring were given over to this. Archaeological evidence from these sites also indicates that this happened. They found tons and tons of evidence of these rituals, underscoring the severity of these practices. There's one less harrowing account that I didn't mention, and this, I think, is what led to the Lord's judgment. Well, maybe it didn't lead to it, but it was really what got the ball rolling. So there was this young woman in the city, and there was a traveler coming to seek shelter. You know, she had compassion. She just wasn't one of the norms that wanted to see people, tortured. So she provided the stranger with bread and water. She tried to do it in secret. But as you guys know, that act of kindness was strictly forbidden by the laws of her people. And when the townspeople learned of her deed, they seized her and brought her before the judge, who decreed that she be punished by death for violating their decree and aiding strangers. So in a display of just complete barbarity, they soaked her entire body with honey, placed her where the beehives were, and swarmed the bees on her. The bees attacked her relentlessly, causing her such swelling that she eventually succumbed to the torture. Her agonizing cries were not ignored, though. They were ignored by the citizens, but they ascended up to the heavens, reaching God. This was the act of inhumanity. I'm not sure if I said that right. This was the act that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. Amongst all the other grievous sins, this was the final act that provoked the Lord's wrath, leading him to send his angels to investigate. In the book of Genesis, it recounts that final act of rebellion against God's people. And this final act was the moment when two angels arrived to investigate after that woman was literally tortured to death by the bees. God sent his two angels to investigate. When these two angels arrived at the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, they witnessed firsthand the wickedness of the town that had reached God's ears. Their arrival was not just an investigation, but the final opportunity for Sodom to prove whether it deserved judgment or mercy. But what happened that night just sealed their fate. At sunset, two angels arise, disguised as men, entered the city of Sodom. Lot's Abraham's nephew, he manned the city gates. Remember, Lot had already lost a daughter to the wickedness of this town. I'm surprised he still was there. But he worked the gates. This was a position held by the community elders, indicating that Lot may have had some level of authority or influence in the town. But despite his status, Lot was fully aware of the vile nature of Sodom's inhabitants and the dangers that awaited any outsiders that showed up. So when Lot saw these two strangers, his heart was immediately gripped with concern. The angels, unaware of really the extreme wickedness that was there, told Lot that they were just going to spend the night in the open town square. This was a common practice in ancient times, as travelers would rather sleep under the stars in the public area instead of, putting people out. But Lot knew what would happen to them if they remained unprotected in the streets. He said, "No, my lords, I insist. Please turn aside into my house and spend the night. Come wash your feet, and in the morning you may go your way." Talks about that in Genesis 19:2. The angels initially refused, saying they would stay in the square, but Lot was so insistent, and he, quote, pressed upon them greatly, Genesis 19:3, until they finally agreed to take shelter in Lot's home. This insistence by Lot just shows how deeply concerned Lot was and understood the depravity of this city. Inside Lot's home, the angels were treated to a meal, unleavened bread, which is a meal often associated with urgency and haste, as if Lot sensed something coming. But the peace in the home didn't last. Word had already spread throughout the streets that new travelers had arrived, and soon the entire male population of Sodom surrounded Lot's house. And quote, Genesis 19:5, where are the men who came to you tonight, Lot? Bring them out to us, that we may know them. You guys know what we may know them means. The Hebrew word yada, which translated as know, is a direct reference to sexual relations. The men of Sodom were not just interested in hospitality. They had every intention of sexually assaulting them and torturing these strangers. Lot, in a desperate attempt to protect the angels, he stepped outside and pleaded with the mob. Quote, I beg you, my brothers, do not do this wicked thing. Behold, I have 2 daughters. You can have them. Let me bring them out to you, and you do as you want with them. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. Genesis 19:8. The men of Sodom were not interested in Lot's daughters. They were determined to harm the visitors. The mob turned violent, demanding that Lot step aside. They quote say, this fellow came to live here as a foreigner, and now he dares to judge us? They began breaking down the door and preparing to storm the house. At this moment, the angels revealed their true power. They reached out, pulled Lot inside the house, shut the door, and struck the men of Sodom with blindness. Genesis 19. The men of Sodom, confused and unable to see, enraged, they stumbled in darkness. A symbol foreshadowing of the spiritual blindness of the Sodom's people. This moment was a turning point. Sodom had proved beyond any doubt that it was irredeemable. That night, the angels instructed Lot and his family to flee immediately, for God's judgment was incoming and unstoppable. As dawn approached, the 2 angels who had come to Sodom turned to Lot with a sense of great urgency. The previous night has confirmed and solidified what God already knew. Sodom and its people are beyond redemption. The angels, having witnessed firsthand the city's wickedness, their violence, their corruption, now delivered their final message. Time was up. Quote, Genesis 19:15, arise, take your wife, your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of this city. They instructed Lot to gather all of his family, but his son-in-laws, daughters, and anyone else who would listen, and to flee immediately. The destruction was imminent. There would be no second chances. But when Lot went to warn his son-in-laws, who were engaged to marry his daughters, they laughed at him. Quote from Genesis 19:14, to his son-in-laws he seemed to be joking. They could not believe that their city, a place of wealth and prosperity, could be wiped out in a single day. So like many today, they were blind to the signs of impending judgment, dismissing the warning as nonsense or exaggeration. Their decision to stay would cost them their lives. As the first light broke in the morning, the angels could wait no longer. Despite their urgent warnings, Lot still hesitated, perhaps struggling to let go of the life he had built in Sodom, or perhaps just overwhelmed by fear and confusion. But there was no more time. And while he lingered, quote, the men took hold of his hand. The angels took a hold of his hand and his wife's hands and the hands of his 2 daughters. And the Lord, being merciful to him, brought them out and set them outside of the city. End quote. Genesis 19:16. The angels physically had to seize Lot and his family, pulling them to safety because in his hesitation, God's mercy was upon them. They led him outside the city and gave one final command. Escape for your life. Do not look behind you or stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Genesis 19:17. Lot, still in fear, pleaded with the angel, saying he could not make it to the mountains. Instead, asked if he could flee to a small town nearby called Zoar. The angels granted this request, and Lot hurried with his family towards Zoar. As the sun fully rose, the judgment of God fell. Fire and brimstone rained down from the heavens, consuming all the surrounding cities except Zoar. This beautiful, lush, prosperous valleys where these cities once stood became a barren wasteland, forever marked by God's wrath and unrepentant wickedness. But not everyone obeyed the angel's command. As they fled, Lot's wife disobeyed and looked back towards Sodom, perhaps longing for the city that she was leaving behind or unable to fully detach herself from that way of life. The instant she stopped and looked back, she was turned into a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26, becoming a permanent symbol of what happens when people cling to the world instead of obeying God's call to flee from destruction. This moment serves as a dire warning. When God issues a final call for escape from judgment, hesitation can cost you dearly. The people of Sodom had every opportunity to repent, but they ignored the warnings, mocked the messengers, and refused to change. In the end, only Lot and his 2 daughters escaped, while the rest perished in the cities. You know, this story is not just a story of an ancient city and history. This is a prophetic warning, a picture of what is coming again. As Jesus himself in Luke 17 said, "As it was in the days of Lot, so it will be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed." I see a lot of reflection in today of Sodom, of its wickedness, of its lawlessness, and the rejection of God. God, time is short. Time is short. You know, Jesus himself warned that the end times would mirror the days of Lot. He says, "Likewise also, as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed all of them. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed." Luke 17:28-30. We see this mirror reflection growing in today's world with the sexual perversion. Modern society completely normalizing extreme sexual immorality. Laws being rewritten to punish those who stand for biblical morality. Gender confusion, genetic manipulation. Everything of those is all on the rise, just like the days of Noah, the days of Lot. You know, laws in many countries now criminalize Christian beliefs, just as Sodom punished those who upheld righteousness. We see it with the little ones trafficking, the genetic corruption, all of this stuff mimicking Sodom's extreme wickedness. The Bible has made it clear that God will once again judge the world for its rebellion. Just as Sodom's judgment came suddenly, so too will the final judgment come upon this last generation. You know, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was just not about one sin. It was about an entire society given over to a reprobate mind of rebellion, of oppression, of perversion, open defiance to God. The Bible confirmed that Sodom was a city consumed by cruelty, genetic corruption, and demonic influence. We see it today, the world descending into the same type of depravity. It is literally a modern push to normalize wickedness, to silence those who are righteous, to promote rebellion against God. And this mirrors what happened in Sodom. But just as God rescued Lot, he will rescue his people before the final judgment. Really, the biggest question is, who's going to be like Lot? Coming to their senses, escaping judgment to get away from the fire that's going to rain down? Or like the Sodomites, who ignored all the warnings and decided to live for this world, unable to detach from the worldly things. Folks, it's rampant. Most people I engage with outside of you guys have no interest in letting go of their worldly, fleshly desires. But there is a coming time where every knee is going to bow, and even if they're not a believer now, they will be then. The only difference is some will be in all his glory, where most will be gnashing their teeth, burning for eternity. It's really up to each and every one of you what route you're going to take.